Well, good afternoon and welcome to CTU and to the Winter Shapiro Lecture. My name is John Polakowski, and I, among other things, direct the Catholic Jewish Studies program here at Catholic Theological Union. This series of lectures has brought Jewish speakers to campus for well over a decade now, and we're very pleased to have with us today Frida Kerner Furman from DePaul University, who will be addressing the topic Bereavement, Storytelling, and Reconciliation, Peacebuilding between Israelis and Palestinians. There are a number of students here who are in the recent Abrahamic Children's course, which took us to Israel and Palestine for primarily a look at the contemporary situation more than sort of walking in the footsteps of Jesus. And so I think this lecture in particular fits in very well with the orientation of that particular course. Frida Kerner Furman is a professor in the Department of Religious Studies at DePaul, where she has taught since 1986. She was the founding director of the university's Center for Interreligious Engagement, with which we here at CTU in the new CTU DePaul Strategic Alliance work together with. Her basic academic degrees are from the University of Southern California, including a Ph.D. in religion and social ethics. Dr. Furman and I have known each other actually through the Society of Christian Ethics for many, many years. She is the author of a number of books. One is, I'm sure, very intriguing, Facing the Mirror, Older Women and Beauty Shop Culture, which was the recipient of a 1997 Kangas Miranda Prize by the American Folklore Society's Women's Section. But she has also written on, published recent articles in the Journal of Religion, Conflict, and Peace on the topic she is about to address today. So in the name of the Shapiro Lecture Series, in the name of CTU and the Interreligious program here, I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Frida Kerner Furman.
Good afternoon. I am honored and delighted to be here with you today. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to deliver this Shapiro lecture. And of course, thank you, John, for your kind introduction. I don't know about you, but for me, it has become increasingly difficult to pick up the paper in the mornings, saturated as it is with news of conflict, discord, and violence, seemingly everywhere. At times, I become overwhelmed and despondent. And then I think about the responsibility I have to my undergraduate students to offer them some hope about the future. After all, they're just beginning their lives. What should I do besides engaging them in the ethical analysis of injustice, violence, and dehumanization, and offering them theoretical proposals on how to contest these? A few years ago, these concerns led me to the serious study of reconciliation and peacebuilding, which I have explored in the classroom, in my research, and in compassionate listening training. As a committed Jew, it felt natural and urgent for me to pursue these investigations within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The situation in that part of the Middle East is so discouraging at the present time that it is difficult to imagine anyone there feeling hopeful about peace and reconciliation. Yet despite the bleak outlook, there are grassroots organizations that continue to persevere in their commitment to peace. The Parents Circle Families Forum is just such an organization, a binational NGO committed to peace building and reconciliation between Israeli Jews and Palestinians from East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Its most distinctive feature is its membership. 300 families from each side who have lost a close relative to the conflict. Its principal approach is its use of storytelling to connect people across the divide. In recent years, storytelling has received a great deal of attention as an important method used by adversaries in reconciliation work across the globe, usually in situations following violent conflict. Less is known about groups' use of this approach in the context of ongoing conflict and asymmetrical power relations, as is the case in Israel-Palestine. In late 2010, I spent 2 months in Jerusalem doing field research with Parents Circle precisely to address this gap. My work involved conducting in-depth interviews with 12 members in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Beit Jala, and attending several presentations in English given to visitors from abroad. In this lecture, I plan to share some of the stories that members tell and to highlight key moral dimensions of the Parents Circle work in both interpersonal encounters between Israelis and Palestinians and in their joint peace-building activities. Following the talk, I hope I can expand on what necessarily is a brief, abbreviated presentation in order to address your questions and concerns. So the first part of the lecture I have called Meeting the Other. After his brother Yusuf was killed by an Israeli soldier at the entrance of his village in the West Bank, Jewish co-workers called Khalid to offer condolences and apologies, but he refused to talk with them. From the start, his anger flared up, feeding his hatred even for those Israelis he had known before, because everyone on the other side is guilty of what has happened to your brother. This was 2000, the year the Second Intifada took place, or at least broke out. 2 years later, Khalid's little brother, Syed, 14 years old, was shot dead as well. Sighing wearily, Khalid says to me now, head in his hands, "It's like that, again and again, the same drama." This time, members of the Parents Circle Families Forum, at the time an exclusively Israeli organization, hoped to meet with Khalid and his family and provide them with some comfort. Once again, his first reaction was refusal. But his mother argued, "Those people are talking about peace." "Everyone wants peace," retorted Khalid, skeptical. "All the people are talking about peace. They are lying to us. They are killing our children." Yet she insisted, arguing that these were bereaved families, like us. Eventually, Khalid relented, largely because he was driven by curiosity. I had a question. Are Parents Circle members crazy people? Have they lost their mind? He could not fathom a rational connection between the reality of losing a loved one and the desire to meet the other. They killed your brother, and they're interested in meeting the other side, the perpetrator? So he opened up his home, and they came and told stories of their own relatives' deaths. Khalid listened attentively to each story, remaining silent himself, and in the story of every one of them, I found my story. And then, not knowing exactly how this happened, he said, "I also have a story like every one of you." And I started talking about Yusuf and Sayed for the first time. And when he finished his story, Khalid announced, "I think I belong to this group. I want to be in this group. I think we should bring peace. I think I belong here. We should have peace here." At the time of my interview with Khalid Abu Awad in 2010, he was the Palestinian co-director of the Parents Circle Families Forum, whose Palestinian office is located in the town of Beit Jala, some 6 miles south of Jerusalem. How do we explain Khalid's seemingly sudden determination to engage with members of Parents Circle, given his previous resistance to meet with Israeli Jews? What motivates bereaved families to embrace the other and to join in shared peace building? Why does the work of Parents Circle work? And what can Parents Circle teach us about storytelling and reconciliation efforts in such a troubled environment. Khalid's poignant recollection of his first experience with this organization presents a fruitful platform from which to begin my exploration, as does his recollection of the time when Parents Circle, having become binational, organized the first meeting at the Palestinian village of Deir al-Hatab near Nablus to invite bereaved families to join the organization. A couple of Israeli parents talked about the loss of their sons, after which one of the Palestinian men said in response, "You know, before we met you, we were very happy whenever we heard that an Israeli soldier had been killed. But now, after meeting you, the parents, it will be harder for us to have this kind of happiness when we hear something like this, because we know that they're your sons, just like we have sons. We know now that you are suffering and that the pain that you have is the reason for your loss of soul. It will not be easy any longer for us to hear or to be happy with such news." Khalid offers me the following commentary on that father's declaration. For me, I think this is the point of the Parents Circle work, and this is what we try to bring to the people. In short, Parents Circle members are messengers of reconciliation. Palestinians have ample cause to hate Israeli soldiers, given the latter's role and actions as safekeepers of the Israeli occupation, akin to Israelis' hatred for suicide bombers and for those Gazan organizations that have for years sent rockets into the Israeli city of Sderot, targeting civilians. Yet in the course of an hour or two, we see a major transformation on the part of bereaved Palestinians. Empathy is clearly at work here. Seeing the suffering of the other opens up the possibility of identification and compassion, or identification with and compassion toward the other's pain, a dynamic that has received a great deal of scholarly attention in what some call the age of empathy when referring to the present time. This dynamic seems to be operative here in rather extraordinary circumstances. Empathy is extended across enemy lines in the course of continuing conflict, and it emerges between parties who have been traumatized through the loss of their children, parents, and siblings, deaths each side perceives as the consequence of morally indefensible acts of violence. Moral inclusion. Participants' courage and willingness to engage in dialogue set the stage for the possibility of personal and social change. Finding commonality in suffering becomes a transformative moment in these encounters. Each side is able to withdraw its hatred by witnessing the other's suffering. Acknowledging each other's pain seems to replace blame. When the Palestinian father asserts that he will no longer rejoice when an Israeli soldier is killed, he is in fact engaged in a form of moral conversion. In addition, through shared storytelling about their experiences of loss and pain, he has found commonality and bonded with members of the other side, and in so doing, he has expanded his circle of moral responsibility from a position of exclusion of Israelis to one of inclusion. Randa also reveals a commitment to greater moral inclusivity when she tells me that through her participation in Parents Circle, she feels strongly that I can't let one of my people hurt one of them, referring to Israeli friends and colleagues she has made through Parents Circle. They are now part of my reality. The broadening of moral responsibility we see here may well have a necessary antecedent, that is, recognizing the other as a subject. As is well known, antagonism and conflict are triggered and sustained through stereotyping and vilification of the perceived enemy. Before attitudes can change, the other must be perceived as a human being, just like us, that is, with a distinct personality, a history, and a life. face-to-face encounters that expose the suffering of the parties involved decidedly facilitate this kind of recognition. This shift in moral attitude takes place among Israelis as well as Palestinians, as demonstrated by Nir Oren, who is the Israeli co-director of Parents Circle and whose office is located in a suburb of Tel Aviv. Some years ago, he attended his first parents' meeting. Largely unacquainted with Palestinians at the time, not unusual for many Israelis, Nir, a social worker by training, felt ashamed when he met bereaved Palestinian parents who were his professional counterparts, doctors, government officials, corporate managers, realizing they did not fit his image of the Palestinian peasant working on his field. Hence began his openness to meeting the other and expanding the range of his moral imagination. Soon thereafter, he attended a Parents Circle weekend retreat, which he found to be a euphoric experience, as he was able to tell of his mother's death several years earlier during a suicide bombing, with the feeling that the other side was containing my story, that is, listening attentively without judgment or angry retort. Empathic listening. Nir raises here the important role that listening must play if storytelling is to be a productive tool of reconciliation. This approach only works when the storyteller can count on an audience that listens with respect and an absence of contestation, at least in the short term. Empathic listening is taught to Parents Circle members so that they can hear the other's narrative, even if they disagree with the perspective of the speaker, a difficult but essential exercise if trust is to be developed. Yehudit, an Israeli bereaved mother, tells me of the time when a mixed group of Parents Circle members went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum located in Jerusalem. Seeing photos of Nazis with dogs in their exhibit, a Palestinian bereaved mother declared, "This is exactly like Israeli soldiers with dogs in Nablus." This association was difficult for Yehudit to hear, since for her, the Israeli army uses dogs to find explosives and is therefore not comparable to the Nazis' genocidal aims. But that's the way she sees it. That was her impression. So provisionally, Yehudit let the woman's interpretation stand as an expression of her own experience. It is important to listen to it from their point of view, says Yehudit, and it brings empathy. For the sake of the other, one has to be open to recognizing the other's right to have a different narrative. In the long run, Yehudit and others believe that if you're part of the forum, you have to be encouraged to tell yourself to say things the way you see them and to listen to the way they see things. I think otherwise you cannot be together. Unlike some groups committed to coexistence whose work focuses exclusively on finding commonality across the board, the Parents Circle does not shy away from addressing disagreements. In fact, members repeatedly describe their organization-wide meetings in images suggesting lively and emotional debate. Very clashing, Navas tells me. Full of loud arguments, recounts Marwan. More expansively, Lev says, we see things from different angles. We don't agree immediately on things, and sometimes the shouting goes up, right up to the ceiling. Yet he concludes by saying that after a very heated discussion, we come out even more convinced that we need to work together in order to put an end to the bloodshed. Nir informs me that in a large member seminar in 2006, members of both sides were told to ask the difficult questions of one another. Some people became alarmed, afraid that this approach would ruin us. But questions, sometimes provocative ones, were asked, such as, How come you don't reject the suicide bombers? How come you send your son to the army? Early in the seminar, an argument arose as to whether to continue in this vein or continue exclusively to try to find commonality. Members concluded that the parent circle was strong enough to start fighting. We believe we don't just want to have hummus and hugs, shorthand for superficially good relations that avoid deeper disagreements. Recognition. Much has been made in the scholarly literature of recent years of the significance of recognition as a moral value. Beyond the more generalized philosophical and existential meanings that recognition may signify, there are important local meanings that deserve attention in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Both populations, as is the case in other ethnic or nationalist conflicts, suffer from dehumanizing characterizations by the other side. Palestinians feel that the condemnation leveled at suicide bombers is unjustly extended to them as a matter of course by the Israeli populace in general, shaped by the mainstream Israeli media and especially at the present time by right-wing government officials. As a result, there's a palpable and urgent desire among the Palestinians that I interviewed for the recognition of their humanity. Randa, a mother of 5 whose 2 brothers were killed by the Israeli army, reveals this sentiment whenever she tells her story. Constructing an imaginary message to the soldier who killed her favorite brother, she says, "I will face you. I will never cut you to pieces. I will never be a monster to you. I will invite you to live with my family for 2 days, where you will find that we are human, that we deserve to live exactly as you do. If you give me a chance to show you that I'm here, that I'm not an animal, that I'm not with horns, then I think I will succeed in showing you my humanity." The Israelis that I talked to have been deeply informed by egalitarian commitments, even before joining Parent Circle, but their sensitivity to Palestinian suffering has been significantly expanded through their joint dialogues and activities. Israelis, in my view, also seek recognition from their Palestinian counterparts in the Parent Circle. They wish to be reinstated as moral human beings, to be rehabilitated, if you will, from the Palestinian characterization of all Israelis modeled after soldiers assigned to the West Bank, whose actions are perceived as vicious and humiliating towards Palestinians. They, too, want to be seen as individuals worthy of respect, as those who disagree with the occupation and who affirm respect for human life and dignity, Israeli and Palestinian alike. So the dialogue functions as a context for the mutual recognition of both suffering and moral character for both sides of the divide. Transcending victimization. Intractable ethnic and nationalist conflicts typically lead to feelings of victimization on both sides, sometimes manifested in competitive ways, as in claiming, "We suffer more than you do." In fact, Vamik Volkan uses the term egoism of victimization to characterize situations when there's really no empathy for suffering experienced by a group's traditional enemies, although it may be as severe as that of the group itself, or even worse. In Israel-Palestine, both the Holocaust and the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948 for Palestinians, so both of these act as the historical antecedents for more recent losses, thereby justifying for each side claims of greater victim status, typically based on ignorance about the adversary's pain. In the absence of communication across the divide, people often remain immobilized by their grief, their anger, and this self-definition as victims. According to both Palestinians and Israeli members, encountering the other results in a shift of self-perception and relief from the experience of being victims. For example, during a public lecture, Saleh declares assertively, "I cannot live in the refugee camp and be a victim all the time," thereby rejecting that label. Nir captures the sentiment as well and expands on it when he tells me that during his first 3-day seminar with Parents Circle, I could hear their story without fighting about who is the greater victim. He came to realize that I don't want to be a victim anymore. Although I am a registered victim, I don't want to act as if I am a victim. I can define what I'm doing, not according to the situation, but according to what I want to achieve. In short, participation in the Parents Circle moves members like Saleh and Nir from the experience of victimhood to one of empowerment and agency as they commit to a mutual cause, namely working for peace. And now I move to the second part of the lecture, which I called Seeking Reconciliation, Turning Personal Pain into Social Ends. The Parents Circle Families Forum believes that a process of reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis needs to be developed if peace is to be realized between the two peoples. This position is shared by other grassroots organizations whose approach also fits under the category of people-to-people diplomacy. Their view is that peace agreements are only pieces of paper unless they're supported by an infrastructure of trust by people on both sides of the conflict. Consequently, central to the Parents Circle mission is to influence the public and political decisions makers to choose dialogue and the piece of peace over violence and war in order to achieve a just settlement based on empathy and understanding. Furthermore, members believe that if people who have lost so much can talk to the other side, so can everyone else. It is not surprising, therefore, that a favorite Parents Circle slogan is, "We won't stop until we talk." Over the years, since its original founding in Israel in 1995, Parents Circle has engaged in a variety of activities designed to achieve this goal. Its chief public activity has consisted of presentations given by members in various venues, including schools, community groups, and visiting foreign delegations. In the interest of time, I will briefly discuss this activity now, principally as it is carried out in Israel. Early on, the Parents Circle began conducting what they call lectures in Israeli high school classes. These are storytelling presentations of loss and bereavement, collaboratively conducted by a Palestinian paired with an Israeli member, intended as a tool of humanization. For, as Zvi puts it, it is critical to convince students of the basics that Palestinians and Israelis are not monsters. For this process to be effective, it is important, at least initially, to see the individual qua individual, that is, beyond usual stereotypes and perceptions defined strictly via nationalist categories. More accurately, perhaps, the goal is to see the person as both an individual and a member of a group. According to Nir, when I see this Palestinian in front of me and I talk with him, he's an Israeli. He's a Palestinian, but he is also a person. Now you're standing in front of an individual, and now he is human. You find humanity. Considering that each side has been socialized to perceive the other in a very negative light, this strategy of humanization, if successful, is no small feat. Reconciliation as a moral imperative. All Parents Circle members that I met identify reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis as the main goal of their involvement in the schools project. Many do it because they sincerely expect that eventually this work will bear fruit. Others are driven by a sense of duty, unsure about the future. For example, as an Israeli, God feels responsible for the unjust actions of the Israeli government in the occupied territories. I prefer being responsible than ashamed. I feel obligated to do something, he claims, even if it does not change the situation. Lev's involvement stems from his desire to represent his dead son, who at a young age felt obligated and committed to do something. Several Israeli interviewees are impelled by their perception that the Israeli government's actions towards the Palestinians are anti-Jewish. In regards to the so-called siege of Gaza during winter of 2008 and 9, for example, Yoni says, "It is not human, it is not Jewish. We have an obligation as Jews to be just." For Nava, the settlements are the central ethical issue in the conflict. Jewish ethics, she declares, teaches us to be good to others as you are to yourself. But the current government does not do it. They do the opposite, and that kills me. The ultimate goal of these and other Parent Circle members is to reach a just and peaceful resolution to the conflict so as to spare others the grief they have known. Individuals also tell me in anxious tones how important it is for them to protect their living children and grandchildren from future harm. By sharing the stories of their losses, they hope to use their pain for the sake of social transformation. Awakening the public. Parent Circle members are, of course, aware of the general ignorance and distrust that characterizes Israelis and Palestinians' attitudes towards one another. Hadassah believes that the Israeli public is completely numb, living with a closed mind. The Parent Circle job, therefore, is to awaken the public to the Palestinians' experience under occupation. Khaled finds it most rewarding to see the impact of the lectures at Israeli schools, as they give students a new picture of the Palestinian people. Following these lectures, he says, we see students coming to us and hugging us and telling us that we've opened their minds, that we've opened their eyes, that we're bringing them hope. This is not the Palestinian they have met or they have known in the past. Nava's view is that before the lectures, Israeli students think that Palestinians have horns and tails, and I don't know what else. From my point of view, it is very important that they see the Palestinian speaker is a real man, not a terrorist, and he wants peace, like me. Students' exposure to flesh and blood Palestinians and their suffering removes social blinders and expands their moral imagination, as Lev reports about some student responses. They say after a lecture, "We've never heard it put it that way. We never thought that Palestinian families also weep for their children." So it is precisely the storytelling nature of these events, as opposed to presentations of facts and statistics, that enhances the possibility of transformation. I agree with social ethicist June O'Connor when she writes, "It is in narrative description that we gain a sense of moral impact. It is in the detail that our moral imaginations are stretched and our constructive moral thinking challenged." In other words, because the communication transmitted during these lectures involves principally emotional experience as opposed to didactic or intellectual information and interpretation, audiences are more likely to open up to one another. Not infrequently, in response to the lectures, some students will write, "What can I do to help? I think I have to become active." The paired nature of the school presentations undoubtedly models for students both empathy and the possibility of reconciliation. God is well aware that most bereaved Israeli families are not part of the Parent Circle. Instead, they tend to be nationalistic and right-wing. Through lectures, he says, I have to show another possibility, an alternative reaction to loss. Presenters make no secret of their trust in and fondness for one another. When paired with Yoni, for example, Khalid tells classes that he has lost 2 brothers to the conflict, but that in Yoni, I have gained a brother. Please excuse me, even though I'm very familiar with this material, I still get rather emotional, as you hear from time to time. Conquering fear, modeling agency. Unsurprisingly, students' fears regarding the situation surfaces during these events. Randa believes that understanding the other conquers fear, hence the urgent need for parent circles' reconciliation work. Fear, she says, is the true enemy. I will bring peace if I believe that my enemy is not a soldier, but that my enemy is his fear. How can I make an agreement with someone who is afraid of me, or I feel afraid of him? Before anything, we should destroy this monster between us. My enemy should understand me, should know me, so that knowledge and understanding lead us to make this big difference. Lev reports that Jewish students often express profound fear, challenging him in this way. How can you contemplate sitting down with those people who send their kids to blow themselves up in shopping malls and bus stations? How can you think of sitting down with them? We've had our Holocaust. We're entitled to do everything not to repeat that experience. We are afraid, and we have to look out after ourselves. A Holocaust survivor himself, Lev responds, "You are afraid, not more than me, not so much for myself, but for my family and for my grandchildren. You speak of the Holocaust, but where will fear lead us? What will we do?" Palestinian students also respond by listing their fears and grievances about the way they have to live under Israeli occupation. And Lev counsels them in this way. Look, I know what it is to feel without being able to control your future. I've been a little refugee boy without the ability to know what to do, how to get on. But I ask you, will another bomb or another stone bring you your homeland, your suffering homeland, any nearer? That's not the way. We have to dry up that spot of despair and think of another way. And then the students say, okay, tell us, what's the other way? So Lev says, I just want you to know that that way of thinking involves the idea of compromise. Both sets of students express a sense of powerlessness about what they can possibly do to change the situation. They ask Lev, so what do you want us to do? We are youngsters. Even our parents have no real say in these things. These things are decided way up. Presidents, prime ministers. There's nothing we can really do. And Lev tells them, no, important things require a two-way movement. Obviously, there has to be movement from above. But there has to be movement from the grassroots. That's how it was in South Africa, and that's how it was when the United States was involved in Vietnam. There has to be a grassroots movement. And he tells them, I believe that you can choose an aim, a worthy aim like peace, and you have the power to work for it, to get it, and you have to be active. He tells them, in a few years, you will be starting your own families. So will you be prepared to lean back and wait for somebody to bring peace down for you? You have to be active. Talk to your friends, your family, your parents, your neighbors. You have to go out and be active. It is clear that in this classroom encounter, Lev uses the pain of his own experience as the bereaved father, as a Holocaust survivor, to empathize with students' fears, grievances, and sense of powerlessness. But he does not stop there. he also models for students a way to work for peace in the midst of conflict by providing them with an embodied way to make a difference, talking to people, addressing the conflict head-on, being active in the pursuit of peace. Dangerous memories. When parent circle members tell stories of the death of their relatives at the hands of the other side to school audiences, they frequently present to students counter-narratives to the normative master narratives of each people, the latter suggesting that Palestinians are terrorists and not to be trusted, that Israelis are violent and not to be trusted. In these ways, these stories challenge their listeners to deconstruct received assumptions and reconstruct more complex, multiple, and inclusive narratives. Perhaps such storytelling may be understood in part as a pedagogy of dangerous memories. Such pedagogy, for example, may also have been at work when a large group of parent circle families, 70 from each side, participated in a visit to a Palestinian village destroyed in 1948, where some members were raised as children. Yehudit recounts how moving it was to see them coming to the place, touching the ground, taking the ground and touching it, her voice fading as she concludes, and they could describe every place. Here was the mosque, here was that. Seeing the Palestinians' emotional response, Yehudit felt she could hear and validate their story. For Lev, the visit pressed him and his fellow Jews to try to see and feel what our friends went through. I expect that the experience was similar in important ways for Palestinians who accompanied Jewish members to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. Such exposure to the other's lived experience interrogates accepted master narratives, expands the boundaries of received identities, and leads to solidarity with the other. Undoubtedly, one of the reasons for the parent circle reputation and credibility, they have won many international awards, so their reputation and credibility among its various audiences is the cultural capital garnered by its members because they have suffered disproportionately for the sake of their respective peoples. Ironically, for individuals who now reject war and exclusivist nationalist strivings because they have lost so much and wish to spare others their unspeakable pain, they are honored in by their countrymen because of the perceived sacrifice their dead relatives have made to each other's cause. Hence, because bereaved families are beyond suspicion, parent circle members are situated in a particularly good location to influence public opinion, one lecture at a time. And now for a brief conclusion. I was first introduced to the Parent Circle Families Forum through the 2006 documentary Encounter Point. I was immensely impressed then. In fact, I was moved to tears by the courageous and generous work of this organization for demands that its members deploy their most personal, wounded experience of loss and grief in the interests of peace and reconciliation. This kind of work remains largely hidden from public view because contemporary media across the globe typically choose to focus on stories of conflict and destruction, of hatred and vindictiveness, and not on accounts that provide us with models of the best that human beings are capable of. Exposure to members of the parent circle is thus an ennobling and inspiring experience. It has brought me hope, which I can pass on to my students and to audiences like you. I conclude with a beautiful articulation of this hope expressed by Jamal as he speaks of the parent circle's work in the schools, which for him is key to changing the deeply entrenched antagonism between Palestinians and Israelis. A Palestinian father who lost his son to the conflict, Jamal says, "Our purpose is to open the minds of young people of the next generation We build the columns. We prepare the lands for them. We plant small trees for them. We start all of this from our tears after losing our relatives. If we continue in this way, they will benefit from the food and they will taste it. Thank you.